Hello, everybody. Welcome to our July 14th coffee shop for .org Solutions. We're glad that everybody is here today. So hopefully you can hear us at this point. So go ahead and raise your hand if you guys are able to hear us. I saw a couple hands go up, so that's great. For those of you who were with us the last couple of weeks, I hope you've enjoyed the sessions and welcome back. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're glad that you're here. So this is actually the fourth of our coffee shop series that we have been doing on professional development for specifically around virtual events and taking your event virtual. We're hoping that all of these coffee shop events that we do, you find to be informational, but also relatable, and that you can find things that you are able to do that will directly benefit your nonprofit right away. So we will be launching additional items as part of the our coffee series, our cafe series. And actually we'll be talking a little bit later in this broadcast at the end about what is coming up for both August and September. We do have some additional webinars that are going to be coming in August and September. And we're also going to be launching some other things that are going to be available to you via email that are going to be either quick bites, but also some things that are a little bit more in-depth. So sorry for those of you who have been to our webinar before that you're going to have to hear this again, but we really want to go over the format of today's webinar so that everybody is able to participate and get the information that they need. So today we have two panelists plus a moderator, but we're also going to be watching the chat box and the Q&A box. So if you actually have any questions or you have things that you want to let us know about, please put those in either the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will address those as we go along. The format of these webinars is a Q&A format, so I'm going to be serving as moderator today and asking questions of our panelists. But if you do have questions during during the event, we want to make sure we address those right away. There's also going to be time at the end for everybody to be able to answer questions. So you can do that either via the chat or you can do that via the Q&A. We are recording these webinars. We're going to be posting them to our YouTube channel. We are hoping to have that done by the end of this week, and we will let everyone know who's participated in our webinars that those are available. So please be patient with us. We've had to do a little bit of editing. We want to make sure we have that all good for you. So first of all, I want to talk about what our topic is today. So like I said earlier, today is part 4 of our 4-part series on making the most of your virtual event. We're going to be talking with our panelists today about how do you communicate with your donors before the event, during the event, and after the event. So as I think we all know, communicating with our donors is more important than ever. Our panelists are going to be sharing their insights on who, what, where, when, how, and why, and to be the most effective you can in communicating with your donors. So let me introduce our panelists. All of us today are from .org Solutions. We wanted to make sure that we wrapped up this 4-part series talking about one of the areas that we know quite well, and that's communication. And our first panelist today is Sara Lunenberger. Sara never meant to be a fundraiser, but her first job out of college was a development assistant, and she never looked back. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. Most of us never ended up in development on purpose, so it sounds like a familiar path. She loves working with our nonprofit clients because they know what they want to achieve, but may just not always know how to get there. So she integrates her knowledge and fundraising best practices with the organization's capacity and helps them create processes and plans that are usable. So she really believes that nonprofits make the world a better place. And from her previous positions to the fantastic clients she works with now, she learns a little bit more about the world we live in every day. Sara has a BA in physical education from Mount Union and a master's in organizational leadership from Malone. She's a member of AFP, both the local chapter and national chapter, and she is a board member there. She loves Mexican food, for those of you who know Sara, and she is an avid reader. Our second panelist is Kaylee Soffinger. Kaylee is passionate about using her skills to elevate nonprofits and small businesses' presence in the community. With past experiences in both the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, she develops creative and thoughtful and target strategies and solutions for clients, all of which aim to highlight their unique stories, missions, and impact on the community. Kaylee has a BA in Communications from the University of Dayton, is a Marketing Communications Committee member at St. Martin de Porres High School, and loves working with nonprofits to create new sustainable ways to share their stories. She also loves to read and enjoys exploring Ohio City and Tremont areas in Cleveland, where she lives. And I am Amy Wong, and I'm the moderator today, as I mentioned before, and president of .org Solutions. So I will also be contributing comments along the way. So please feel free to add information as you would like to. So at this point, I am going to stop sharing our screen, which I think I've already done. And so you should be able to see all three of us right now. So we're going to dive into our questions, which we're going to be spending about 25 to 30 minutes on the questions. So, okay, first question. Before we talk about how to communicate with donors before, during, and after the event, we want to make sure we talk about how to communicate with donors in general. How have things changed with COVID, and how are they the same? So Sarah, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to remember is that you're not the only one going through all of these changes, right? So you're not the only one that has to work from home, or maybe your office closed. Your donors are going through that same thing. And likely they're the same people that they were prior to COVID. You know, depending on what it is you're doing, if you're not on the front lines of COVID, or you haven't changed your business model in any way, your donors that gave to you last year this time, or the beginning of the year this time, or 3 years ago, are probably still the people that are going to be giving to you now. So I think it's really important to just think about how you want to be communicated to during this tumultuous time. And then really think about, you know, how have you been communicating with your donors normally? You know, don't change anything drastically just because of everything going on, because your donors have been your donors and they are used to however it is you've been communicating with them in the past.
Okay, how about Kaylee?
Yeah, I mean, going off of what Sarah said, I think one of the most important things to remember is, you know, make sure that everything is relevant. So the things that you're saying to your donors and the way that you talk to your donors shouldn't change all that much just because of what's been going on in the world. Think about, you know, all those emails and, you know, social media messages that you've seen since all of this started. Some of it might be targeted to you, but it might not make any sense to you. Make sure that you're not doing that when you're communicating with your donors during this time. You know, keep up the same communication schedule you were before, but make sure your message makes sense for the time that we're living in right now, and that your donors understand how to interact with you and how to communicate with you in a way that's beneficial for both them and your organization.
And I think it's also important to talk about personas and actually understand who the people are that you are talking to. So talking to your board members is going to be a little bit different than actually a lot of bit different than talking to a donor who may be a small annual contributor, which would be then different than talking to a volunteer. So, you know, make sure that even though you may be sending a message about a similar topic, that you're gearing those particular messages to those particular individuals. All right. Next question. So nonprofits are facing tough decisions right now. Do we hold our event or do we not hold our event? Is it virtual? So those who are thinking about how they're going to hold their auctions or galas, that kind of refers to you. Is it something that you can still do in person? So, you know, some people are continuing with their golf outings. Some, I see there's been some 5Ks that have been added back in that are no longer virtual. So how should or could an organization communicate before the event? I'm going to start with Sarah.
So I think this is a very timely question. I sit on two different committees that both have decided, one, to just cancel the event altogether and move it to next year. The other, to really shift their entire event focus and just do an online auction fundraiser, which would be brand new for them. So, you know, I think that's where everybody is right now. You know, I think when this happened in March, we were all thinking we'll postpone until the fall and it'll be fine. The fall's here and we're not ready to be, you know, joining in events at all. You know, I feel like Amy said, there are a few that you can do in person, you know, golf outings, some 5Ks, you know, you might be able to host some sort of virtual event outside at a park somewhere. But for the most part, you really have to think about, can we still fulfill what we want to fulfill and hit our goals by doing it virtually? Or are we really better off by putting our manpower and our resources and our time to doing something next year that is bigger, better, different, things like that. The other thing I really think is important to think about is, have you already started planning? Was this something that you were going to do in the spring and all of a sudden you've switched it? Or is this something completely different? If it's something that you've already planned and told people you were postponing, you better tell them what you're doing instead at this point. Get a save the date out, explaining to them what you're changing, what the new dates are. Even if you don't have the details, all of the details, at least let people know, thank you so much for, purchasing an auction item, or, donating an auction item in March. This is what we're going to do. It's going to be an online auction sometime in October, things like that, just to get that information out to them, because otherwise they have no clue what you're doing. If you haven't started yet, and this is going to be something brand new, again, get that information out so people know to put it on their calendars. Even though there's not a lot to do, I feel like there's still a lot on my calendar of things that I have to do. So, even thinking, well, nobody's going anywhere, so it doesn't matter if it's on their calendars, I think is really unfair to people. Make sure that they know when you're going to be doing your event, what time, what date. Again, if you know the format, at least give them some sort of heads up so they know what to expect. Especially if you're going to deliver something to them, they're going to want to know, oh, I'm getting a meal that day, or I need to be home that day to accept flowers, or whatever it is that you might be sending their way. And I think too, the other part of the communication is really going to be explaining what your need is. And I know that sounds so simple because you're a nonprofit and you're a fundraiser, and of course you're going to explain your need, but people really don't know. If you're not on the front lines of COVID and dealing with this every day, if you've had to shut your doors, they might say, well, you haven't been doing anything. You have to explain that you've still been helping this many people, or you're still employing this many people, or, really explain and get out there why you still need the funding. Because I think, as we all know, nonprofits fill a lot of holes in our communities that people don't necessarily remember. And I think right now, the in-your-face charities that are very obviously handling, everything that's happening are getting a little more attention, but that doesn't mean your nonprofit's not doing something to fulfill a need in the community.
So you mentioned not having all the details and things like that, Sarah. I think the important part of that is just because you are unsure doesn't mean you can't really talk about being unsure. I think we're in a time right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, and just being able to convey that information to your donors ahead of time and saying we're still trying to work this out. Our plan is to still do this, or we don't know exactly what our plan is, but we will continue to communicate with you. I think people are okay with that, especially in the world we're living in right now. But people like to know that, okay, you don't know either, so I'm okay with that. So I just wanted to make a comment about that. So talking about, what communication will look like, Haley, it's obviously going to look different, as we talked about before, depending on the donor you're talking to. So, communication, especially now, is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's important to keep in mind, like Amy said, the different groups of donors that you talk with regularly are going to need to receive this information in different ways. For example, some of your biggest supporters, your sponsors, your large major donors, you need to call them. Once you know what's going on, once you know the event is canceled, once you know the event is shifting, that's a call, a phone call, I think, rather than an email or any sort of other communication. Even maybe a video meeting if you're able to set one up, and you might want their advice or, some of their insight on how they think you might be able to shift your event depending on who they are and how they support your organization. Email is a really important tool as well during this time. You want to make sure you're not overwhelming people though. So while it is important to explain as much of the detail as you have, you also don't want to be sending an email every other day with another detail added on, you know, saying, okay, now we've figured out we're doing the auction and this is how that's going to look. You really need to save all of that information and kind of share it in a timely fashion so that people aren't overwhelmed by the information they're receiving from you. Social media is important, but it shouldn't be your main way of communicating about the event. I think, you know, save the dates, or we're shifting to a virtual event this year. Messages like that are important. If you're opening this up for anyone to join your event and you're really interested in getting some new donors in the door because you're going virtual, social media is a great way to do that. Encourage your board members and your donors to share on their personal pages, and make sure you're sharing information about how to register and what their involvement can look like in the event. And you might be able to get some new people in the door who haven't otherwise interacted with you before. Direct mail is also a good way to share information. And if you regularly send direct mail to your donors, I think it's definitely something to consider. The only thing that I would caution you with direct mail about is the lag time. So you need to make sure you have that built into a communication strategy and schedule to make sure that, you know, by the time you send a postcard, maybe something's going to change within the 2 weeks between someone getting it and the event coming up. You need to make sure you have a plan for communicating what those changes might be if the mail piece doesn't match what the event looks like now. And then I think one last thing to keep in mind is, you know, we're all on Zoom calls all the time right now, whether it's Zoom or Google Hangouts or all these virtual meetings. Make sure you're keeping everyone that's close to your organization involved in understanding what the planning looks like for the event. So, you know, that's your board members, your committee members, even your employees. Make sure they understand what's going on and that they're aware of what the format looks like so that they can communicate it to everyone that they're speaking to as well.
So one of the things you commented on, Kaylee, which I think is really important, is having a communication schedule and a communication strategy. And, you know, we always say we're huge fans of plans at .org, but in situations like this is even more important to be able to put it on paper. So whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or you have another type of tool that you like to use, maybe it's just a table in a Word document or Google Doc or whatever, is making sure that you start from the day that you were having the event and work your way backward and start to figure out, like, how do you want to communicate with people? If you haven't started communicating about your event yet, I think it's really important to say, you know, okay, we're going to try to send out a weekly update. So, and that weekly update doesn't have to be a full newsletter. You know, maybe that's just, hey, we wanted to keep you in the loop and here's a few details. And as we talked about, for those who were on the corporate session, it was really important to talk about how can you recognize your corporate sponsors as part of this pre-event communication. So maybe that newsletter is a way to recognize corporate sponsors or individual donors who have helped you underwrite the event, or maybe you have a new auction item that you have added to your auction that's really exciting, or a special raffle that you're doing, give people not just information, but calls to action so that they feel like they're a part of an event coming up to the event. So make sure you have a very, very solid communication schedule leading up to the event and factor in every single variable. And I can't stress enough what Kaylee said. It's like, we all get a lot of email. And the last thing that people want is to get more email that isn't something that might provide value or relevancy to them. So really keep in mind that, you know, focus on your audiences and make sure that all of that information is relevant and is timely and is as concise as possible. All right, so what actually does, and I think I just talked about this a little bit, was about the frequency, but frequency, you know, how does actually that look, you know, for different organizations? I think that, you know, it does look very different. So your schedule might not be the same as the schedule of another organization, right? So there might be an organization whose people are expecting a weekly e-newsletter from them, whereas others are not. Some are more regular in their social postings, others are not. So just make sure that you know, all of that information is out there as it works for you and the people that you serve.
Yeah, and with that, I think it's important to remember that as you get closer to your event, those groups change. So as you have people who have registered for your event, you don't want to be sending them messages that say, register ASAP, join us for our event, because they're already on board. The more you overwhelm their email address or their email inboxes, the more they're likely to unsubscribe. And that's definitely not something you want, especially leading up to an event or after an event. So make sure that you're segmenting those groups, and you know who has already said they're planning to attend, who's helping you plan the event in general, because those emails are going to look a lot different than to the mass email list where you're just trying to get people in the door. So keep that in mind as you get closer, because those lists should look different.
And I think that's something you can put on your communication schedule too, is, okay, in week 4, there's 4 weeks out for the event. We know we're sending an email. Maybe there's 2 different emails. The registrant email is different than the non-registrant email. So we have to make sure that we separate those out. And that's why a spreadsheet, having it all in a plan, is a really good way to be able to do that.
Definitely.
So on to actually during the event. So we've seen examples of quite a few events actually that have made the choice to go virtual. Each one seems to be very different, which I think is great. I mean, I think like every organization is different. Their events should be different. How they have those events for their donors should be different. I think that's awesome. What are some things though that organizations need to think about when they're deciding how to communicate with their donors during these events? I'm going to start with Kaylee.
So I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind is, just as this is all new for you, this is new for your donors as well. So you could have donors who are used to coming to your event, and the format generally is the same, and they know what to expect, and it's comfortable. And that's a good thing for a lot of people. They like to know, this is an event I love coming to, and I love supporting this organization, and I know what it's going to look like. Well, now we're kind of all thrown out of our comfort zone. So you need to make sure that once you decide what that format looks like, you are clearly communicating what you expect of your attendees and what they should expect from you. So, if it's a multi-day event, that looks a lot different than a one-night event where everyone signs on and they're listening to speakers that are pre-recorded or part live. If it's multi-day, when should people be engaging with the event? Is it just auctions and they need to check on their bids? Is it, there's speakers throughout multiple days? All of those things, make a difference. You need to make sure that people understand not only what that format looks like, but how they engage with you. So are you asking them to log on to a specific platform? Is there a chat function? Some of those very specific details, you need to make sure you're clear with everyone about what you expect of them and how they can access it. And what they can expect. Everyone wants to have fun at these events, even though we're all at home. So making sure you're communicating, what's different about this event and what's going to make it special is important as well. I think obviously some of the most important things you need to be clear on are your times and, what do people need to download? Is there an app involved for an auction? Is there a certain browser people need to use to access your platform for your event? Who are the speakers? What can they expect on the day of, and when does that speaker go live? That's a lot of information that I'm throwing out there, but I know every organization and every event is going to look a little bit different. So those are just some things to think about. And I think, being as transparent as possible is important, and it'll just make people more excited to attend your event.
So what about donors? I mean, so obviously you think of certain things like Fund a Need, and there's certain auctions where, maybe some more major donors have kind of made commitments prior to that in order to encourage support of others. How would you facilitate something like that during the event, especially if you're doing some sort of auction or something where you're doing a Fund a Need, for instance?
So, I think it depends on the organization, but I do think, are you talking about during the event, Amy, or before the event?
Yes, during
the event. Yeah. I think that there's a couple different ways to do that. You can utilize social media to share some of that information. If you have a match and you're trying to get to a certain level to unlock that match, that's something you could push out on social. It's something you can share via email leading up to the event, if that's a possibility. Things like Fund a Need. like Sarah said earlier, being open about what you need from people and the support you're looking for, I think is very important, especially right now. People always want to know what their donations are going toward, but now more than ever, being transparent about what your organization is going through and the support you're looking for is especially important. And during your event, you should definitely be sharing those messages. So anything you can do to build that into your communication strategy and schedule is important. Sarah, you might have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I would just say too, really rely on your software. You know, more than likely, if you're going to be doing an online auction or a fund in need of some kind, or a live auction, even if you're going to be doing that, you know, you're going to be using a software, and almost all of them have built-in features that do all sorts of cool stuff. You know, they can tell me if somebody's outbid me. You can actually, most of them set a limit for yourself, so it'll keep bidding for you up until that point, and then it'll tell you if you've been outbid. You know, you can do fund and need updates with the thermometer. I actually saw one the other day that it was like their own logo filled up with color to show where the fund and need was. So there's some really cool things that some of those softwares can do that are automated. You know, you don't have to touch them. Those people are automatically getting those messages directly to their cell phone or directly to their email at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. You know, so all of that just kind of gets automatically sent out for you. The other thing I think too that's really important to talk about would be to keep reiterating to people how to use the software. I was on a webinar just a few weeks ago that had a poll idea, you know, that you could send in your opinion and pick, and you did it through your cell phone. And I'll admit I was not paying complete attention when they explained how to do that. So for like an hour, I couldn't participate because I didn't know what number to text to get involved in the poll. So luckily the second day that they did this webinar, they had it up on the screen the whole time so that I could then participate. So I think that's important too, that, you know, yeah, everybody's doing these webinars and we're so used to it now, but if you just say one time, you know, text participate to number 33079 and then you never mention it again, there's going to be a lot of people that missed it. And so you need to keep kind of reiterating some of those things so that people know, you know, how to participate if they miss a part.
Yeah. I would also say too, you know, keep in mind that during the event, it's going to be really important to have technology help available to people and be able to communicate that, because, you know, I'll even say it's like we start these webinars, you know, we start pulling things up about a half hour ahead of time just to make sure that our technology is working and to make sure that we're able to get this webinar out to all of you. And it's, you know, we're pretty tech savvy, but there's a lot of people who are attending your events who love coming to your events, they love participating in your events, but they're just not able to maybe access your event because they're just not able to do that. You know, they're just not tech savvy. So, you know, maybe you communicate to people like, hey, if you need technology set up ahead of time, you know, email us at this number or call us. If you want to make sure you have the right browser and what that actually means, maybe do an FAQ and have an FAQ available that you can send them either via email or have it as a link to your website. So the more information you could push out to people, and also I always say factor in kind of the common denominator is lower than you think it's going to be. And it's not that people aren't smart, it's just people over the courses of their careers or lives have needs to use technology at many different levels. So just, you know, keep that in mind as you're communicating as well, that, you know, if somebody does have trouble, you don't want them to leave because they're not able to get to your event. So, all right. So we've seen, so actually what are some of the messages that, you know, what are some of the messages you can send during the event? So we talked about like ways that we communicate to our donors and participants during the event. What are some messages that you can send during the event? We'll start with Sarah.
So I think the important thing for you to do during the event would be obviously get some participation, right? So if you can create a hashtag or something for your participants to kind of gather around, I think that's really important. You know, if it's live, if there's a chat function or some sort of function that you can do so that they're watching you live and can actually participate, I think participation is huge because, as we all know from sitting on these webinars, right? Like if you're not participating, it's really easy to kind of, all of a sudden you're doing something else. You're checking your email, and if it's an evening event, that's even more, so maybe the kids are home or, the dog's barking, which mine was earlier. So I think, some of those things, it really just a matter of trying to get people to stay engaged. Kaylee, do you have other options?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some cool things from events that have already happened. Take a picture of yourself and share it on social media. Some interesting program booklets that are, virtual now that people can click through to different, visual and video elements that they are engaging with during the event. Those are all things I think you should try to incorporate. I think it's hard to think sometimes outside the box. How do you take all of these great things you do in your normal event and make them virtual and make them engaging in a way that really shows the impact that you're trying to communicate? But those pictures and those stories and those videos, those are all important to share, even though you're not going to be with the people in person at the event. So find creative ways to share those, whether it's through email before, during, and after the event, whether it's on social media during the event, keeping people updated on what's happening as the event is actually going on. I think if you have a multi-day event, social media is especially important because you want to keep it top of mind and, people are remembering to log back on and engage with some of the sessions that you're planning or, pay attention to the auction and where's the fund in need at and all of those things. And, I think just being consistent is really important. Videos and photos, like I said, those are always fun. And like Sarah mentioned, anything to get people involved, I think is really important because it can be hard sometimes when you're the participant sitting on these videos. You want to make sure that people feel like they're part of the event, just like they do when they're there in person with you. So anything you can do to facilitate that, I think is great.
I would also say too, we're throwing a lot of information out here about things that you could do and things that you can't do. We recognize that not everybody has a full team of communications professionals and people that are super tech savvy. So, it's really important for you to, not be overwhelmed and try to figure out, there's a couple things, what can you automate? So you figure like if you have Constant Contact or MailChimp or HubSpot or these different automation platforms, what can you automate? What kind of things can you sit down and do all at once? What are some things that you can do for social media that you can post ahead of time so that that those things are done? So, what are some things that you can't do? Like you might not have the budget to be able to go out and do full scale, high quality video. But I think right now, with the cell phones being as good as they are, a lot of organizations can do some quick videos of what they're doing, and they can do them relatively well and relatively inexpensively because I think people understand that video doesn't have to be, the highest of high quality all the time, that there's certain things that are acceptable. So, you always have to do, I think, what's right for your particular organization and also do with what's in your budget. So
to add on to that too, if you're going to have a live portion where maybe you want people to share a video from their own house or photos from their own house, plant some, make sure that some of your staff maybe is set up to do that for you. A couple board members, don't be afraid to make sure that you have some participation in those areas. Even if it's, posting to your social media and tag the event, make sure that you have some people lined up to already do that for you. It's kind of like, when you have a question, you want to make sure you have a couple people ask questions that they're going to ask to kind of get the ball rolling. Same idea. You want to make sure that you plant a couple people that will post their photos or do a video for you.
So speaking of questions, we have one that came in via the Q&A. That was a good segue there. This question is, our annual gala event involves a live party with a brief program that culminates in donating on the spot toward a particular goal, as well as an online auction which takes place over the course of a full week. If we have to go all virtual this year, the online auction doesn't really need to change, but what do we do to replicate the live part of the event where people are donating to raise the thermometer? Who wants to take that one? Sarah, I think I think it's you,
Sarah might
Kaylee,
be
because it looks like
frozen.
Sarah froze.
Yeah, it looks like it's me. That's a great question. I've been at those events, you know, where you're raising paddles and it is just like everyone is building off the momentum of other people. I think there's still ways to do that virtually though. You could try to extend it so that it's not just a 1-day event. You know, you could try to make it mirror kind of your online auction and make it go multiple days where you're trying to hit a different goal each day. And that just gradually raises the thermometer rather than having it skyrocket in one night like it might do in a live event. That's just one idea that comes to mind. I think, you know, trying to really communicate those impact stories is really important. It's important at any event. It's important when you're talking about, you know, why you need donations at any point in time. But during something like this, where you're really trying to drum up a lot of support at one time, I think, you know, telling those stories of what's happening in your organization and how it's impacting the community and what that donation goes to right now is really important. So trying to weave those into the narrative of your virtual event, I think will help you hit your goal.
So I'd also like to piggyback onto what Sarah said, because as she mentioned, you know, if you're going to ask people to share videos or share on social, you want to have those people planted. I think you need to do exactly the same thing with some of your major donors. So if you're doing an online, the regular auction, and let's say your live part of the event has, you know that you have some particular donors that have been very supportive of you over time. Maybe it's having a conversation with those donors, especially if you have a fund to need and that's just straight donations of cash. Make sure that you can get people at certain levels who have already agreed to commit to that, or that will actually, I guess, virtually raise their paddles as part of the event. So that way, again, you're going to get that momentum from those people. And then it also gives you a little bit of a security beforehand that you know that there's going to be some dollars coming in the door, and you don't have what would be anyone, I think's worst nightmare where there's just nothing happening, right? Yeah. So, Sarah, did you catch the question? I saw you froze a little bit.
I did. I'm so sorry. You know, for some reason, my internet at home, like right around 2:30, just kind of likes to shut off. So I apologize to everyone. Yes, I did hear the question, and I don't exactly know what all Kaylee said, so I'll make my answer quick so I don't duplicate what she said. I think my thing would be, if you're going to do it multiple days, maybe focus on a few hours each day that you're going to do that live donate portion. If you're still going to say do it on a Friday night at 7 o'clock and you're going to do an hour of live just fund a need, set goals, of okay, in the next 15 minutes, if we raise $500, we have a match for that, so that type of thing. I think matches for fund a need always go really well. And I think breaking up those numbers into smaller goals. So even if it's, hey, our auction's a 5-day auction, we're just going to do the fund a need every day. Maybe we have a daily number that we want to hit and kind of keep that thermometer going throughout the day of trying to hit those numbers in smaller functions might help.
I think also just one thing to keep in mind, I've seen this actually even before everything with COVID, and it seems to work pretty well. If you can find a way to get people involved in sharing things regularly on social, not just your employees and not just your team, but some of your donors, some of your sponsors, and do things like have a special profile picture on Facebook that has your logo and says that you're raising money for this week. Those really do catch people's attention, and they make them aware that something's happening and maybe they should check it out. It feels like sometimes it's all over. Like there's a lot of organizations doing things like that, but all it takes is one friend to change their profile picture to something like that for you to click the link and find out what exactly they're asking you to donate. And then that just raises awareness for your organization. So using some of those, more viral social techniques to drum up some attention and kind of get some more donations in the pipeline for you, I think is a great way to make a regular live part of an event work virtually.
And I would tag on to that too, is like, if you're not super savvy on social and some of these methods of trying, kind of creating more of a viral component to something, try to find some younger folks. I mean, there's a lot of younger folks who might be, might be your kids, they might be, nieces and nephews, they might be young communications professionals who are just looking to get some more experience. they may be willing to volunteer for your organization, and they may be willing to help and just give you some advice. I would say the big thing though is you have to work with them. They're going to be able to push the message out, but it's going to be really important for you as the organization to create the message so that they don't feel as though they have to create that message. So it's very much a partnership of, you know, the more experienced folks working with, you know, everybody comes together on this, which I think is really great in social media if you're able to get both of those to come together.
Yeah.
So now our event is over. Whew, that was a lot of work. What is next communication wise? Sarah?
I mean, at this point, you're all about stewardship, right? So only, you know, just because your event is online doesn't mean you toss out all those normal things you did after your event. You know, you're going to treat it just like any other event. You're going to thank those people that participated. You're going to send your thank you letters with your receipts and, you know, all of those things. I would say too, the difference there is going to be if you did, let's say, an online auction, those people have to come pick up their stuff. So you have a chance to socially distant thank them. You know, maybe they get, you know, a little something special for coming to pick up their auction item. Maybe you give them a little bag of information that goes with their auction item to talk about what you've been doing or, you know, how to help you further. So you do have a little bit of a touch point there of being able to actually thank people in person a little more than normal. You know, I think the other big thing is, and for some reason, we work with a lot of organizations, and I've worked for a lot of organizations that don't do this. Make sure those people get entered into your database. You know, for some reason, event donors aren't treated the same as annual fund donors or major donors. You know, these people were supporting you. They were interested enough to sign on to whatever it was you're doing and spend money with you. So, you know, make sure that they get added in and get those, you know, non-event solicitations in the future. You know, they get your other communications. You know, make sure you have a line that they have to fill in their email address whenever they check out, or if you're using a software, it collects all of that for you. Do all of that because, you know, these people spent time with you. And just because they may have done something on a smaller level or just purchased a basket from you doesn't mean they couldn't turn into somebody that really could be a major donor for you in the future.
Yes, and to tag into what Sarah says, even if they came to the event and if they did not buy anything, still add them into your annual fund.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they did buy something, still add them into your annual fund. I would be selective as to who you pull out. So let's say you had a donor who gives you $10,000 annually through Fund a Need. I would probably pull them out of your annual fund. But if you have somebody who buys a basket, they definitely should be in your annual fund because, you know, they did get something for what they spent their money on. And so I think it's really important to be able to solicit them. I mean, they can always say no. I just feel pretty strongly about that. And to tag also onto, you know, thank yous. I know Kaylee's going to talk about this a little. Don't let it linger.
Yeah.
Don't let it linger. And I'll go ahead and let Kaylee, she's going to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, right off of what Amy just said, I think make those phone calls. Your major donors, those people who did a match for you, who were, you know, your biggest supporters through this virtual event, they need a phone call. They need something a little bit special to recognize the contribution that they made to your organization. Make sure that you make those phone calls and you make them in a timely fashion. Same with, you know, the thank you letters and, you know, any follow-up emails. Make sure that those go out while the event is still on people's minds. You don't want to lose momentum. And especially if you have new attendees, you want to make sure that they're getting information about who you are. There is a chance that there are people who will attend your virtual event because their friend asked them to, or because they saw their friend was going to and they decided to do it too. Or they just happened to be with someone who at the time that the virtual event was happening, they were in the same house. You never know, but you want to make sure that if someone logged in and was a part of your event, that you're communicating with them and making sure that they understand who you are and what you do and that you're thankful for their participation. You know, that goes a long way and it makes people more interested in getting more involved with your organization again in the future. So, and like Sarah said, make sure everyone gets entered into your database. I mean, if they never interact with you again, you don't know. You just have no idea. They could pop back up a few years from now after attending your event once. And, you know, the fact that you've regularly been communicating with them kept you on their mind for all that time. And now they're finally ready to get involved. So make sure that your database is updated and that you're sending those communications in a timely fashion.
And I would say put the recognition and stewardship as part of your communications calendar for your event. Give yourself a deadline of which you want everything sent out. So, if you're using online software, that actually will automatically do a lot of your receiving for you. But it's always nice to still be able to send out that additional thank you and make sure you're doing that in a proper way. But if you're I'm just blown away by how many times we've talked to people and they're like, oh gosh, we still haven't entered people in the donor base for like our event 6 months ago. It's like, what? So, you have to set yourself, so let's say by a month later, you want your entire event wrapped up. I think people reasonably understand that it may take that time. I still think that's too long, but if that's what you need to do for being a small organization, I think that's acceptable. But I think you need to say like a week, maybe within a week, we want all of our thank you notes to go out. Or 2 weeks or whatever that is, but you have to set a time. It has to be part of your communications plan.
Yeah. The other thing too, I would mention is especially during the fund a need, if it was for something specific, so let's say you were raising $10,000 to purchase a van and 3 months later you buy the van, send a letter with a photo to everybody that participated in the fund a need and say, thank you so much because of your generosity. Here are our clients using the van for whatever it is we purchased it for. That's a really nice way of a few months after they get another thank you with this is what we really did with your money. Because let's be honest, that's what donors want to know is what did you do with it? I gave you this money. What happened? Who did I help? How did it help your organization? And if I bought something, I want to see it. I want to see what I bought. It's kind of like whenever you give your nephew like a shirt for Christmas, and then he sends a picture of you wearing it. It's like, hey, he liked it. Like he wore it, it makes you feel good. Same thing with donors. If I help buy a van, I want to see the van.
That's great advice. So we have a question before we get final thoughts from Sara and Haley. We do go ahead and start submitting your questions via chat and via Q&A, but we do have one in chat right now. This organization has a small email list compared to their direct mail list for their annual lunch and craft show. What would be a simple message they could put on a postcard to encourage them to provide their email address so you can engage them in social media and other activities, and that they can also use in both directions, not just for communicating, but also to get them as annual fund donors and also things like that. So I think what the question really is saying is like, how do you capture email addresses from people? What's a good way to do that?
That's really hard, to be honest. It's not that easy to get people's email addresses. I think if you're looking at, you specifically mentioned a postcard. I think if you're going to put a simple message on someone to get them to do a postcard, you can obviously point them to your social media pages. So they at least can start following you and getting information a second way other than just the direct mail. If you have a newsletter email that you'd like to start or that you do send out, send them to your website to sign up to receive the newsletter. And that's a really easy way of starting to get email addresses. The biggest way is when they register for your lunch or your craft show, ask then, because, it can be very tricky to just have people get something in the mail to ask them to go online somehow to put in an email address. Just most people aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think because people do get a lot of unwanted email, and so they're very hesitant to give out that email. Some people don't check their email very often, so they may not give out. Maybe their work prohibits that from happening, and they're not good about checking their personal email. So, I think the only thing that you can constantly do is ask. But maybe if you're putting information on a postcard, you say something as simple as, we're trying to cut down on postage so that we can, serve our clients or the people we serve better, provide more to them. We're trying to be better for the environment. So, but then make it that we won't, there will be, if you feel like we over communicate, you can opt out, but I wouldn't put that on there. That's something you can put on the email itself, but explain why you want their email address. Explain to them that you're just trying to provide them with additional information, that you're trying to cut costs, and that you're trying to be able to reach them more effectively. So that might be some simple content you can put on that card. So, all right, I do not have any other comments in the chat or in the Q&A. So actually feel free to continue doing those. And that during the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to have Sara and Haley give their final thoughts about communicating to donors during the event. So Haley, I'll start with you.
I think we've touched on this a lot, and I tell all of our clients this, no matter what communication plan, or marketing plan we're building for them, but make sure you're consistent and make sure you're paying attention to who you're communicating with. I think that is the biggest piece of advice I would like everyone to take away from this. Make sure you're segmenting your donors in a way that makes sense, and make sure you're sending them messages that are relevant to them, that are timely, and that, make them want to engage with your organization and make them want to attend your virtual event. Be as transparent as possible about what's going on and some of the challenges that you're facing, both around putting together this event and, in general. I think everyone has in some way been touched by what is going on in the world right now. Make sure that you're open about what that looks like for your organization and what you're looking for support with. I think virtual events are a thing that probably aren't going away anytime soon. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. This is an awesome new way to communicate with more people on a platform that is, you could be in a different state and attend your event now. That's actually pretty cool. So I think looking at this as an opportunity to engage with more potential donors and more supporters and people who care about what your organization is doing and how you're impacting the community is a good way to look at it. Make sure you're sharing those impact stories and you're communicating about what you're doing to make the community better, and people will respond accordingly.
I would say, first and foremost, make a plan, and not like an in your head plan, but an actual written out calendared plan of, when you'd like to communicate, how you're communicating, and who you're communicating with, which part of your lists are going to get those communications. Two, everything's kind of imploding, right? Like you're trying to plan an event the way you've never done it before. You maybe have never done an online auction, everything else is imploding, but your donors, like I said in the very beginning, are still the same. So if you've never sent an email newsletter for your entire organization ever, I wouldn't use this as the first chance to do that. If your donors are used to communicating with you through mail, then send them a postcard or send them a letter explaining what's going on. We're all still trying to figure this out, but I think, just saying, oh, well, we can only communicate with people through social, even though you really have never done that before,
right,
isn't going to be successful for you.
And I think, with all of this, what everybody, both Sara and Haley have said is like, this is different. It is different. So you actually have to, think differently about how you're communicating too. So, and you have to be patient. I can't stress enough the importance of patience. I've talked to a lot of clients in the last couple of months, and there's frustration maybe with donors, there's frustration with volunteers. And I think that frustration is not with the people themselves, but it's just how people are reacting and resonating and responding to your calls for action. And so I think, for the first 3 months of this COVID situation, it's been, people are just trying to figure out what's going on in their own lives. And I think now that there has been some reopening and up and down, I think people are starting to see outside of that a little bit. And I hate this phrase, but the new normal is kind of everybody's new normal, and they're starting to try to find ways to not be in their house and not do things. So, now might be a good time to just really try to communicate with them and be compassionate and be empathetic. I think that'll go a long way. So we have about 5 minutes left here. So we're going to wrap things up. So I'd really like to thank our panelists, Sara and Haley, again, for helping us wrap up this part 4 of our Taking Your Event Virtual. and thank all of you for coming. So hopefully you were able to get some good information out of today that you can put into action for your event. I know that we can't always go into specifics in this hour because we have, attendees that are from very large organizations, some from small. So we try to get things as much as we can in the middle. So hopefully you take a couple tidbits away that you can get them to work for you. I did want to mention that we have just finalized what our next webinar series is going to be. So we're going to take a few weeks off to give us a little webinar break. But August 4th, we're going to be launching our next grouping of webinars, and that is going to be all around planning for your year-end appeal. So it's going to be, again, broken into 4 parts. We are not going to do them weekly. We're going to actually do them every other week, just to give everybody a little bit of, again, a webinar break. So August 4th, I'm sorry, we're going to be talking about data and your database. So it's how do you actually use that information to help drive additional donations. We're going to be talking to one of our direct mail experts about demystifying your direct mail, and that's going to be on August 18th. On September 1st, we're actually going to be talking about building a year-end appeal timeline. So that is going to be a little bit more of an interactive kind of session that hopefully you can leave that with a timeline specifically for your annual appeal. And then we're going to be talking on September 15th about the content for your appeal, not just your letter, but everything around your appeal. So those sessions are going to actually build upon each other. So hopefully that if you're interested in attending them, I would suggest that you start with the first one and join us if you can for all 4. So again, we appreciate you guys joining us for these sessions and hope you have gotten a lot out of them. And as always, feel free to contact us at .org. I'm actually going to put our information back up here so that you guys can get that information. I know it says thank you for joining us. We'll begin shortly. So we're going to actually put our contact information on there. So again, feel free to contact us if you have questions and we'll be happy to help you out. So have a great day, everybody. For those of you in Ohio, looks like it's going to get a little steamy here in the next couple of days again. So stay cool and stay safe.